I was 63 years old when my daughter called me at 3 o'clock in the morning and changed the course of both our lives. The phone ringing that late instantly pulled me awake. Parents never stop worrying about late-night calls, no matter how old their children become. When I saw Zoe's name on the screen, a knot formed in my stomach before I even answered. My daughter wasn't the type to call at 3 in the morning. She was 34 years old, a mother, a business owner, and usually asleep long before midnight. The moment I picked up, I heard panic in her voice. Real panic. Not stress. Not frustration. Fear. "Dad," she whispered, "please come get me." I sat upright immediately. "Zoe, what's wrong?" There was a loud crash somewhere near her. Then I heard a man shouting in the background. My daughter's breathing became uneven. "Please hurry," she said. "I don't know what they're going to do." Before I could ask another question, the line went dead. I called back instantly. No answer. Again, no answer. A third time. Straight to voicemail. I was already pulling on my jeans before the third call ended. 20 minutes later, I was driving through the darkness toward the Worthington estate. I hated that place. I had hated it from the first day I saw it. The house sat behind stone walls and iron gates like a private fortress. Everything about the family felt designed to impress people. Expensive cars, charity galas, political connections, perfect smiles hiding ugly intentions. Zoe's husband, Blake Worthington, came from old money. His parents spent decades building a reputation as one of the most influential families in the county. Everyone admired them. Everyone trusted them. I never did. For years, I told myself I was simply being an overprotective father. That changed the night of the phone call. When I arrived at the gates, they were closed. Security cameras followed my truck as I stopped. I pressed the intercom. No answer. I pressed again. Nothing. Then I saw movement inside the property. Lights were on throughout the main house. People were awake. They were ignoring me. I called Zoe again. Voicemail. I called Blake. Voicemail. I called his mother, Victoria Worthington. To my surprise, she answered. "Where is my daughter?" I demanded. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. "Zoe is resting." She called me begging for help. "Your daughter is confused." Every instinct I possessed screamed that something was wrong. "Put her on the phone." "That won't be possible tonight." The line went silent for a moment before Victoria added something that still makes my blood boil. "You should go home, Cornelius. You're only making things worse." Then she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. The woman hadn't sounded worried. She hadn't sounded surprised. She sounded prepared, as if she had expected me to call, as if she already knew exactly what she planned to say. That was when I made the decision that changed everything. I put my truck in gear and drove straight through the gate. Metal screamed against metal. The impact shattered one side of the entrance and sent security alarms echoing across the property. I didn't care. My daughter had called for help. Nothing else mattered. Several security guards ran toward me as I crossed the front lawn. One tried to block my path. Another threatened to call the police. I ignored both of them and pushed through the front doors of the mansion. The scene inside looked nothing like a normal family home. Two men I didn't recognize stood near the staircase. Victoria Worthington was waiting in the foyer. Blake stood behind her, looking nervous. Not angry. Nervous. The moment he saw me, his face lost color. "Where is Zoe?" I shouted. Victoria stepped forward. "You need to leave immediately." I moved past her. "Where is my daughter?" Nobody answered. That was answer enough. I began searching room after room. The kitchen, the study, the guest rooms. Nothing. Then I heard a sound from the second floor. A weak thump, barely audible. I ran toward it. Blake tried to stop me. I shoved him aside and continued up the stairs. The sound came again. This time I recognized it immediately. Someone was hitting a wall. Weakly. Desperately. Following the noise, I reached a locked bedroom door at the end of the hallway. My pulse exploded. "Zoe!" I shouted. A faint voice answered. "Dad!" I kicked the door once. It held. Twice. The frame cracked. On the third strike, the door burst open. What I saw inside nearly stopped my heart. My daughter was sitting on the floor beside the bed. Her hands were trembling. Her face was pale. Her eyes struggled to focus. Bruises marked one wrist. She looked terrified. Not intoxicated, terrified. The moment she saw me, she started crying. "Dad," she whispered. "They said nobody would believe me." Behind me, I heard Victoria Worthington's voice. Calm, controlled, dangerous. "Cornelius," she said, "if you take her out of this house tonight, you're making the biggest mistake of your life." I turned around slowly and looked directly at her. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Standing beside her was a county sheriff I knew by name. And judging by the expression on his face, he wasn't there to help my daughter. I had known Sheriff Randall Pierce for almost 20 years. We weren't friends, but we had attended enough community events and charity fundraisers to recognize each other instantly. Seeing him standing beside Victoria Worthington at 3 o'clock in the morning felt wrong. Everything about the situation felt wrong. My daughter was sitting on the floor shaking, yet nobody seemed concerned about her condition. Instead, every pair of eyes in that hallway was focused on me. Sheriff Pierce stepped forward slowly. "Cornelius, I need you to calm down." I stared at him in disbelief. My daughter called me begging for help. He glanced toward Zoe. "Your daughter is going through a medical situation. Then call an ambulance." Nobody answered. The silence told me more than words ever could. I walked directly to Zoe and knelt beside her. Up close, she looked even worse. Her pupils were unfocused. Her speech was slow. Her skin felt cold. Yet there was something important missing. I had spent enough years around people struggling with addiction through community outreach programs to recognize the signs. This wasn't heroin. This wasn't meth. This wasn't someone high on drugs. This looked like someone heavily sedated. Zoe gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Dad," she whispered, "don't leave me here." The fear in her voice erased every remaining doubt. I helped her stand. Immediately, Blake stepped forward. "She can't leave." I turned toward him. "You don't get a vote." His face hardened. "She's not well." "Then why is she locked in a bedroom?" He opened his mouth but never answered. Because there was no answer. Not a good one. Not a legal one. Not a human one. Victoria quickly took over. "Cornelius, you're emotional. Zoe has been struggling for months." I looked directly at my daughter. "Have you?" Tears filled her eyes. She shook her head. "Just once, barely noticeable, but I saw it. So did Victoria." For the first time all night, the older woman's confidence cracked slightly. Sheriff Pierce stepped between us. "Let's not do this here." I stood slowly. "Then where?" He hesitated. "Maybe we should discuss this downstairs." The request sounded reasonable. That was exactly why I didn't trust it. Every minute spent talking was another minute keeping Zoe inside that house. I slipped one arm around her shoulders and guided her toward the hallway. "We're leaving." The reaction was immediate. Blake moved first, then 2 security guards, then Victoria. It wasn't a family trying to help a sick woman. It looked like people trying to stop a witness from walking away. Sheriff Pierce raised both hands. Everybody stop. Nobody moved. The tension became suffocating. Then Zoe spoke. Her voice was weak, but every word was clear. "Dad, they took my phone." Silence. "What?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "They took my laptop too." Blake looked away. Victoria remained expressionless. My stomach tightened. Taking someone's property wasn't medical care. It was control. Zoe continued speaking. "They wouldn't let me call anyone." Every sentence made the situation worse. Every sentence made the people around us look more guilty. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. They told everyone I was using drugs. My blood ran cold. Suddenly the pieces started fitting together. The isolation, the locked room, the confiscated phone, the fear. Someone was building a story around my daughter. A story she couldn't challenge because they controlled who she spoke to. Sheriff Pierce looked uncomfortable now. Very uncomfortable. "Zoe," he said carefully, "maybe we should wait until you're feeling better." She stared directly at him. "You know I'm not on drugs." The sheriff didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. I guided Zoe toward the staircase. Nobody stopped us. Not yet. We reached the foyer. 10 more steps, and we'd be outside. Then a woman entered through the front door, carrying a medical bag. She wore hospital scrubs. Behind her stood another man carrying paperwork. Victoria visibly relaxed. So did Blake. That terrified me more than anything else. They had been waiting for these people. The woman immediately approached Zoe. Mrs. Worthington, we need to continue treatment. Zoe practically hid behind me. No. The woman opened a folder. Your family has already authorized care. Family, not patient. Family. I extended my hand. Let me see that paperwork. She refused. The second man stepped forward. Sir, this is a private medical matter. I took the documents anyway. What I saw nearly made me laugh from disbelief. The forms described my daughter as unstable, chemically dependent, and potentially dangerous to herself. None of it matched the woman standing beside me. Then I noticed something else. At the bottom of the page was a recommendation for emergency psychiatric observation. My pulse exploded. This wasn't treatment. This was preparation. Someone wanted a legal record saying Zoe couldn't make decisions for herself. Once that existed, everything else would become easier. Property, finances, custody, authority. The realization hit me all at once. This was bigger than a family dispute, much bigger. Then Zoe leaned close enough that only I could hear her. Dad, she whispered, it's about the land. Every muscle in my body tightened. The land. 5 years earlier, I had transferred ownership of 80 acres outside Nashville to Zoe as part of her inheritance planning. At the time, it was worth less than $1 million. A recent commercial development nearby had changed everything. Last month, a developer offered nearly $10 million for it. Zoe's name was the only name on the deed. Nobody could sell it without her signature. Suddenly, every piece fell into place. The drugs, the isolation, the psychiatric paperwork, the lies, the fear. Someone didn't just want control of my daughter. Someone needed control of my daughter. Before I could say another word, red and blue lights flooded the front windows. Additional deputies were arriving. Sheriff Pierce looked relieved. Victoria smiled for the first time all night. Then the sheriff turned toward me with an expression I will never forget. It was the expression of a man who had already made his decision. Cornelius Baxter, he said quietly, I'm placing you under arrest for unlawful entry, destruction of property, and assault. As 2 deputies stepped forward, Zoe screamed my name, and for the first time that night, I realized I might not be able to protect her. I will never forget the sound of Zoe screaming my name as the deputies grabbed my arms. Fear sounds different when it comes from your child. It cuts through every other noise in the world. The deputies pulled me toward the front door while I fought to keep my eyes on her. Zoe was crying now, trying to reach me, but the woman in medical scrubs stepped between us. Blake moved beside her. Victoria stood silently in the background, watching everything unfold exactly the way she wanted. Dad, Zoe shouted, don't let them take me. I tried to move toward her, but one of the deputies tightened his grip. Sheriff Pierce avoided looking directly at me. That told me everything. He knew this was wrong. He simply wasn't willing to stand against the Worthington family. Outside, reporters had already begun arriving. Not many, just a few local news crews. That bothered me immediately. The deputies hadn't even finished arresting me, yet cameras were already setting up. Someone knew this would happen. Someone wanted witnesses. As they pushed me toward a patrol vehicle, I saw Blake standing in the doorway. For a brief second, our eyes met. He looked nervous, not victorious, not relieved, nervous. The look lasted less than a second before Victoria placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him back inside. That image stayed with me the entire ride to jail. At the station, the booking process moved unusually fast. Too fast. The deputies took photographs, fingerprints, and statements with a level of preparation that felt rehearsed. By sunrise, I was sitting alone in a holding cell, trying to understand what had happened. The official charges sounded serious: property destruction, criminal trespass, assault on private security personnel. If prosecuted aggressively, they could keep me tied up in court for months, maybe longer. That wasn't an accident. Someone wanted me distracted. Someone wanted me occupied. Someone wanted me away from Zoe. Around 8 o'clock that morning, my attorney arrived. His name was Samuel Grant. We'd known each other for nearly 30 years. The moment he sat across from me, I knew he had bad news. It's worse than you think, he said. My stomach tightened. How? Samuel slid several documents across the table. 3 hours after your arrest, Zoe was transferred to a private treatment facility. I stared at him. What treatment facility? Behavioral Stabilization Center. The name sounded harmless, the details did not. According to the paperwork, Zoe had voluntarily agreed to inpatient treatment for substance dependency and mental health concerns. I immediately laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Voluntarily? Samuel nodded grimly. That's what the paperwork says. I didn't need a law degree to understand the problem. If Zoe was heavily sedated, isolated, and denied access to outside communication, a signature meant nothing. The question wasn't whether she signed something. The question was under what conditions she signed it. Then Samuel handed me another document. This one made my blood run cold. Emergency Financial Oversight Petition. What is that? I asked. Samuel looked disgusted. A request to temporarily transfer control of certain financial decisions away from Zoe until she's considered competent. My pulse exploded. There it was. Not drugs. Not treatment. Not concern. Control. Exactly what Zoe tried to warn me about. I scanned the filing. Most of the language focused on protecting assets from poor decisions allegedly caused by addiction. Then I found the section mentioning the Nashville property. $10 million. The same land Zoe whispered about before my arrest. Suddenly, everything connected. If Zoe could be declared mentally unstable or incapable of managing her affairs, someone else could make decisions on her behalf. Someone like her husband. Someone like Blake. Samuel watched me carefully. You see it now? I nodded slowly. This was planned. Months ago, he replied. The next hour only made things worse. Samuel's investigators had already started digging. Several medical evaluations supporting the petition came from professionals connected to organizations that frequently worked with the Worthington family. One doctor served on a charity board funded by Victoria Worthington. Another had business ties to a development group interested in purchasing Zoe's land. None of it proved corruption, but together it painted a troubling picture. Then Samuel revealed something that truly terrified me. Zoe wasn't allowed visitors, not me, not friends, not extended family, nobody. The facility cited patient privacy and treatment protocols. In reality, it meant nobody could independently verify her condition. Nobody could ask questions. Nobody could challenge the narrative. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Every hour that passed strengthened their position. Every day Zoe remained isolated made it easier for them to portray her as unstable. Then Samuel said something unexpected. There may be one piece of good news. I opened my eyes. What? He handed me a photograph. At first I didn't recognize the man. Mid-40s, dark hair, former military bearing, sharp eyes. Who's this? Samuel smiled slightly. Dante Reyes. The name meant nothing to me, Samuel continued. Private investigator, former Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. My interest immediately increased. Why are you showing me this? Samuel leaned forward. Because 3 years ago, Dante uncovered a guardianship fraud scheme involving property theft worth $12 million. The room suddenly felt smaller. And? Samuel's smile disappeared. And when I told him what happened to Zoe last night, he agreed to look at the case. For the first time since my arrest, I felt something other than fear and anger. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. Then Samuel reached into his briefcase and removed one final document. It was a copy of a laboratory report obtained through a contact at the hospital where Zoe was examined weeks earlier. Several lines had been highlighted. I looked down and read them once, then twice, then a third time. No evidence of heroin, no evidence of methamphetamine, no evidence of opioid abuse. My hands tightened around the paper. The entire addiction story was a lie. Every accusation, every intervention, every medical justification, all of it. Samuel slowly stood. I'm getting you released by noon. I looked up. And then? His expression hardened. Then we find out why someone is willing to destroy your daughter's life for a piece of land. As he walked toward the door, he paused one final time. Cornelius, there's something else. My stomach tightened again. What now? Samuel looked directly at me. The developer trying to buy Zoe's property isn't just connected to the Worthingtons. He paused. Victoria Worthington secretly owns part of the development company. By noon, Samuel got me released, but freedom did not feel like freedom. It felt like walking out of one cage, only to realize my daughter was still locked inside another one. Reporters were waiting outside the county jail before I even reached the sidewalk. Cameras turned toward me. Microphones rose like weapons. "Mr. Baxter, did you attack the Worthington family? Did your daughter suffer from drug addiction? Did you force your way into their home?" Nobody asked why Zoe had called me, begging for help. Nobody asked why a healthy woman had been locked in a bedroom. Nobody asked why medical paperwork had appeared before the ambulance did. The story had already been written for them. I was the angry father who lost control. The Worthingtons were the respected family trying to protect a troubled daughter-in-law. Victoria understood public image better than most politicians. She knew the first version of a story usually becomes the one people believe. I said nothing. Samuel had warned me in the elevator, "Do not speak until we control the facts." So I walked through the noise with my head up and got into his car. The moment the door closed, the silence felt almost violent. Samuel handed me a second folder. "Dante started digging while you were being processed." I opened it before he finished speaking. Inside were corporate records, property filings, development permits, and campaign donations. The connection was clear enough to make my stomach turn. The company trying to buy Zoe's Nashville land was called Riverbend Renewal Group. On paper, it looked independent. In reality, one of its holding companies traced back to a private trust controlled by Victoria Worthington. Not directly, not obviously, but legally enough to profit if the sale went through. "She owns part of the buyer," I said. Samuel nodded. Quietly. "And Blake needs Zoe declared incompetent so he can sign the land away. That appears to be the plan." I looked out the window as the city passed by. My daughter wasn't being treated. She was being cornered. If they could keep her isolated long enough, they could make her look unstable, push the emergency petition, sell the land, and bury the truth under medical language and legal filings. It was clean. It was cruel. And if we moved wrong, it could work. We drove straight to Samuel's office, not my house. He had already assembled 3 people in the conference room: Dante Reyes, a medical malpractice attorney named Elaine Porter, and a retired judge named Franklin Moss, who specialized in guardianship abuse. Dante stood first. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your daughter's case has all the signs of a coercive control setup." I sat down slowly. "Explain it." He placed a timeline on the table. First, they create a private family narrative. Zoe is unstable. Second, they isolate her from outside support. Third, they introduce medical authority. Fourth, they file emergency financial oversight. Fifth, they rush a transaction while everyone else is trying to catch up. Every step matched what had happened. Elaine opened another file. "The most urgent issue is access. We need an independent medical examination. Can we force one?" I asked. "Not immediately," she said. "Not without a court order. And the Worthingtons will fight it." "How long?" "A few days if the judge cooperates. Longer if they stall. A few days." To lawyers, that sounded fast. To a father whose daughter was locked away, drugged, and silenced, it sounded like forever. Then Judge Moss spoke for the first time. "Mr. Baxter, do not underestimate them. Families with money don't always need to win the whole case. Sometimes they only need delay. If the land sale closes before we unwind the paperwork, your daughter may still win later. But the money will already be moved, the debt paid, and the evidence scattered." The room went quiet. That was the first truly practical warning I had heard. Justice after the damage wasn't enough. We had to stop the damage before it happened. Samuel leaned forward. "That's why I filed a notice of adverse claim against the property this morning." I turned to him. "What does that do?" "It warns any buyer, title company, or lender that the ownership and signing authority may be under dispute. It doesn't stop everything forever, but it makes closing the sale extremely risky." For the first time since the call, I took a full breath. Good. Dante wasn't finished. "There's more." He slid another document toward me. It was a loan report. Blake Worthington's name appeared across the top. The numbers were ugly. Personal loans, margin losses, credit lines maxed out, private debt. Blake wasn't rich. He was drowning. His lifestyle was borrowed. His car was leased. His investment accounts were nearly empty. The Worthington name still looked powerful from the outside, but underneath it was cracking. "How much does he owe?" I asked. Dante's expression hardened. "At least $4.7 million that we can see." "That we can see?" Private lenders rarely put everything where people can find it. I understood the meaning immediately. Blake didn't just want Zoe's land for profit. He needed it to survive. That made him dangerous. A greedy man negotiates. A desperate man panics. And Blake Worthington was both. That afternoon, I drove to my house under instructions not to go near Zoe's facility, not to contact Blake, not to confront Victoria, and not to give them anything they could use against me. Every instruction made sense. Every instruction felt impossible. When I stepped into my living room, I saw evidence of a quieter life that suddenly felt far away. Framed pictures of Zoe at age 7 missing her front teeth. Zoe at college graduation. Zoe holding newborn Leo in a hospital blanket. My grandson. The thought of him hit me hard. In all the chaos, I had been focused on Zoe. But Leo was still with the Worthingtons, 5 years old enough to be scared. Too young to understand why the adults around him were lying. I called Samuel immediately. "Where is Leo?" There was a pause. Too long. "We're checking." That is not an answer. "Cornelius, stay calm." I hated that phrase. Stay calm usually meant someone else had the luxury of distance. I did not. 20 minutes later, Dante called. His voice was controlled, but tense. "Leo was picked up from school this morning by Blake." My stomach tightened. "Where is he now?" "Worthington Estate, as far as we can tell." I closed my eyes. They had my daughter isolated. They had my grandson inside their house. They had sheriff's deputies willing to stand in their hallway at 3 in the morning. And they had a financial reason to finish this quickly. Then Dante added the sentence that turned fear into rage. "Cornelius, Blake's attorney, filed an emergency custody motion an hour ago." My hand tightened around the phone. "Against Zoe?" "Yes. They're claiming her alleged addiction makes her unsafe around Leo." I looked at the photograph of my grandson on the wall. His smile was wide, innocent, trusting. He had no idea he had just become leverage. "What happens if they win?" I asked. Dante exhaled slowly. "Then Blake gets temporary custody. Zoe stays isolated, and they use both of those facts to pressure her into signing whatever they put in front of her." I stood completely still. The Worthingtons weren't just trying to steal land anymore. They were building a legal cage around my entire family. Then my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. For 3 seconds, there was only breathing. Small, shaky. Then a child's whisper came through the line. "Grandpa?" My heart stopped. "Leo?" He began to cry. "Daddy said Mommy is bad now." Before I could respond, the phone was snatched away, and Blake's voice came on the line, calm and cruel. "Stay away from my son, Cornelius, or Zoe. We'll never see him again." For several seconds after Blake hung up, I stood frozen in my living room, staring at nothing. The rage I felt wasn't the kind that made people yell. It was the kind that made everything become very clear. Blake had just made a mistake. Not because he threatened me, because he threatened Zoe through her son. That wasn't desperation anymore. That was strategy. He was using a 5-year-old child as leverage. The moment Dante arrived at my house an hour later, I played the recording. We listened to it twice, then a third time. When it ended, nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Dante leaned back in his chair. "Good." I stared at him. "Good?" He nodded. Threats create evidence. Arrogant people always leave evidence. It was the first encouraging thing I'd heard all day. Samuel arrived shortly afterward, carrying several new court filings. The emergency custody motion had been scheduled faster than expected. Blake's attorneys were moving aggressively. That confirmed what we already suspected. They were running out of time. If Zoe remained isolated, if Leo remained under Blake's control, and if the financial oversight petition succeeded, they could create enough legal momentum to force the land sale before anyone stopped them. The entire operation depended on speed. Samuel spread the documents across the dining room table. "The custody petition relies on one claim." I looked down. Every page repeated the same allegation: substance abuse, addiction, instability, risk to the child. The problem was simple. None of it was true. The bigger problem was that lies become dangerous when repeated through official paperwork. Then Dante opened his laptop. I found something. The room immediately focused on him. He turned the screen toward us. A financial report appeared. The numbers made my stomach tighten. During the previous 18 months, Blake had borrowed money from 7 separate lenders. Some were banks, others were private investment groups. One was a hard money lender, known for financing high-risk borrowers. The total debt exceeded $5 million. "How is he still functioning?" I asked. Dante smiled humorlessly. "Because everyone assumes the Worthington name equals money." Then he pointed to another line. "Most of these loans mature within 6 months." Suddenly, everything made sense. Blake wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to avoid collapse. The Nashville property wasn't a bonus. It was his lifeboat. Then Dante revealed the most important discovery yet. One lender had recently demanded immediate repayment. A confidential notice had been issued 3 weeks earlier. If Blake failed to produce significant funds soon, default proceedings would begin. The timeline matched perfectly. 3 weeks earlier was also when Zoe's alleged addiction problems suddenly appeared. 3 weeks earlier was when the medical consultations began. 3 weeks earlier was when the isolation started. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a deadline. For the first time, we could explain motive with actual evidence. Not assumptions. Not theories. Evidence. Samuel looked at me. "This is what judges understand." He tapped the report. "Money." Then Judge Moss joined us through a video call. After reviewing the financial records, he immediately reached the same conclusion. "The custody motion isn't about the child." He paused. "The guardianship isn't about health. The treatment facility isn't about treatment. Everything leads back to the property." Hearing a retired judge say it out loud felt validating. We weren't chasing conspiracies. We were uncovering a financial scheme disguised as family concern. Then the conversation shifted toward strategy. For hours, we discussed options, court motions, independent evaluations, property protections, emergency injunctions. Every solution had strengths and weaknesses. Every path carried risk. Finally, I interrupted. "What do we do first?" The room became quiet. Samuel answered. "We stop reacting." I frowned. "Meaning? They've controlled the pace since the beginning. We need to take control back." It was simple advice, powerful advice. Up until that moment, I had spent days responding to their moves. The arrest, the facility, the custody petition, the lies. Every action placed us on defense. That had to change. Then Dante pushed a folder toward me. "I think we found our first attack." Inside were records connected to Riverbend Renewal Group, the development company trying to buy Zoe's land. At first, the paperwork looked ordinary. Then I noticed several transactions involving consulting payments. Large consulting payments, hundreds of thousands of dollars. The recipients included individuals connected to zoning approvals, infrastructure reviews, and local permitting decisions. Nothing directly illegal, but enough to attract attention. Then Dante pointed to one name. My pulse quickened. The name belonged to a member of the County Planning Commission, a man who also happened to sit on the board of Victoria Worthington's charity foundation. The connections kept growing. Every time we pulled one thread, 3 more appeared. Samuel looked at me carefully. "If we expose this publicly too early, they'll close ranks. And if we wait, we gather enough evidence to make sure they can't explain it away." I understood immediately. This wasn't the moment for revenge. It was the moment for preparation. Then my phone vibrated. Another unknown number. Everyone in the room went silent. I answered immediately. This time the caller wasn't Leo. It wasn't Blake either. A woman spoke softly. "Mr. Baxter? Who's this?" There was hesitation. Fear. Then she finally answered. "I work at the treatment facility where your daughter is being held." Every person at the table straightened. My pulse accelerated. "Is Zoe okay?" The woman lowered her voice even further. "She's not receiving addiction treatment." The room went completely silent. "What do you mean?" I asked. The woman took a shaky breath. "Because your daughter never tested positive for any illegal drugs." My grip tightened around the phone. "Can you prove it?" Several seconds passed before she answered. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes." Then she delivered the revelation that changed everything. "And I have copies of the original lab results they tried to hide." The woman from the treatment facility called back exactly 42 minutes later. During those 42 minutes, nobody in my house spoke about anything else. Samuel canceled 2 meetings. Dante stopped working 3 separate leads. Every person in the room understood the same thing. If the woman was telling the truth, then for the first time we would have something more powerful than suspicion. We would have proof. When the phone finally rang, I answered before the first ring finished. "This is Cornelius." The woman sounded terrified. "I only have a few minutes." Her voice shook so badly I could barely understand her. "My name is Melissa. I work in medical records." Dante immediately opened his laptop and began taking notes. Melissa explained that she had reviewed Zoe's file after hearing staff members discuss my daughter's case. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed discrepancies between the original laboratory results and the documents currently being used to justify treatment. The discrepancy wasn't small, it was everything. According to the original toxicology report, Zoe tested negative for heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, fentanyl, and every major illegal substance listed in the screening panel. There was no addiction diagnosis, no evidence supporting inpatient drug treatment, no emergency justification, nothing. My grip tightened around the phone. Then why is she there? Melissa hesitated. Because those aren't the records being shown to everyone else. The room went silent. Samuel slowly closed his eyes. Dante stopped typing. I already knew what she meant before she said it. Someone had replaced the narrative. Maybe not the actual lab results. That would be harder. But they had created summaries, recommendations, and evaluations built around conclusions the evidence didn't support. Melissa continued. The treatment orders reference dependency concerns that don't exist in the testing. That was all we needed. Not a conspiracy, not a dramatic cover-up. Something much more believable and dangerous. People were using professional language to create a false impression. Then Melissa said something even more important. Your daughter keeps asking for a lawyer. My pulse quickened. She's been asking? Every day? And? The answer made my stomach turn. The requests never make it into the official notes. For a moment, nobody in the room moved. Zoe wasn't sitting quietly accepting treatment. She was fighting. She was demanding help. She was demanding representation. And somehow, those requests kept disappearing. Then Melissa delivered the revelation that changed the entire case. Mr. Baxter, your daughter isn't acting like someone suffering from addiction. I swallowed hard. What's she acting like? There was a pause. Someone trying to convince people she's being held there against her will. The words hit me like a punch. For days, I had imagined Zoe trapped inside that facility, wondering if anyone believed her. Now, I knew the truth. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was actively resisting. The call ended after Melissa agreed to provide copies of the original laboratory records through legal channels. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to attack. The moment the call ended, Dante stood up. Now we know what happened. Samuel nodded. They needed a reason to isolate her. Exactly. Everything kept leading back to the same point. The land, the money, the deadline. Then Dante showed us something he had discovered only an hour earlier. A series of emails connected to Blake's financial problems. One lender had issued a final demand notice 26 days before Zoe's first alleged drug incident. 26 days. That wasn't random. Before the demand notice, there were no addiction concerns, no treatment discussions, no intervention plans. After the demand notice, everything started. Medical consultations, family meetings, behavioral concerns, facility recommendations. The timeline was almost perfect. Blake's crisis came first. Zoe's problem came second. Cause, effect, real motive, real logic. Then my phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number from inside the facility. My pulse accelerated immediately. I answered without hesitation. At first, I heard nothing. Then I heard breathing. Soft, uneven, familiar. My heart nearly stopped. Zoe? Several seconds passed. Then my daughter's voice came through the line. Weak but unmistakable. Dad? I closed my eyes. For the first time since that night, I knew she was alive. I knew she could still fight. Zoe, are you okay? A short laugh escaped her. Not because anything was funny, because the question itself was absurd. No. Hearing that single word hurt more than anything else. Then her voice lowered. I don't have much time. I looked at Samuel and Dante. Both were frozen, listening. Tell me what's happening, I said. Zoe took a shaky breath. They're trying to make me sign documents. Every muscle in my body tightened. What documents? Property papers, financial authorizations, trust documents. Exactly what we feared. But then came the revelation we didn't expect. Dad, it isn't just Blake. The room went completely silent. What do you mean? Another pause. Then Zoe said the words that changed everything. Victoria is running all of it. I wasn't surprised. Not really. But hearing it from Zoe made it real. Then she explained what happened. 3 weeks earlier, Blake asked her to sign an agreement connected to the Nashville property. He claimed it would help solve temporary financial issues. She refused. 2 days later, Victoria invited her to a private family meeting. During that meeting, they revealed the truth. Blake's finances were collapsing. Creditors were closing in. The development deal was their only realistic escape. They needed her signature. Again, she refused. After that, everything changed. Suddenly, family members became concerned. Friends started asking strange questions. Doctors appeared. Meetings happened without her. Rumors spread. The campaign didn't begin because she was unstable. The campaign began because she said no. Then Zoe started crying. Not loudly, quietly, exhaustedly. Dad, they're doing the same thing to Leo. My heart stopped. What? Her voice cracked. They're teaching him I'm sick. Every person in the room reacted. Samuel lowered his head. Dante cursed under his breath. Because that was the true cruelty of the plan. Not the money, not the land, the child. They were rewriting reality for a 5-year-old boy. Then I heard a door open somewhere near Zoe. Voices. Movement. Panic entered her breathing. Dad, she whispered urgently. There's something else. My pulse exploded. What? For several seconds, she struggled to speak. Finally, she forced the words out. I found something in Blake's office before they took my phone. The room went completely silent. What did you find? Zoe's answer changed the entire war. Dad, Blake owes far more money than anyone knows. The call ended before Zoe could explain anything else. 1 second she was there, breathing into the phone, trying to tell me the truth. The next second, the line went dead. I called back immediately. No answer. Again, no answer. By the 4th attempt, the phone had been turned off. The room remained silent for several seconds. Nobody needed to say what we were all thinking. Someone had interrupted that conversation. Someone inside the facility knew Zoe was talking to me. But despite losing the call, we had gained something far more valuable. For the first time since this nightmare began, we had direct confirmation from Zoe herself. She wasn't addicted. She wasn't unstable. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly what was happening. More importantly, she had just revealed something we hadn't fully understood before. Blake's financial problems were worse than we thought. Much worse. Dante immediately shifted focus. Forget the facility for a minute. He pulled his laptop closer. If Zoe risked everything to mention the debt, then the debt matters. For the next 6 hours, he dug deeper than ever before. Samuel and I remained in the conference room, reviewing legal options while Dante worked. Shortly after midnight, he finally looked up from his screen. His expression told me he had found something important. Cornelius, he said quietly, you need to see this. He turned the monitor toward us. At first, it looked like another financial report. Then I noticed the numbers. My stomach tightened instantly. The debt wasn't $5 million. It wasn't even close. Blake owed nearly $11 million. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. That's impossible. Dante shook his head. No, it's hidden. One by one, he explained what happened. Blake had spent years using new loans to cover old loans, personal debt, business debt, investment losses, private lenders, short-term financing. Most of it was spread across different entities, making the total difficult to see. But when Dante connected everything together, the picture became horrifying. Blake wasn't facing financial pressure. He was facing financial extinction. Then came the worst part. Nearly $3 million of the debt belonged to private lenders operating outside traditional banking systems. Men who didn't send polite reminders when payments were late. Men who expected results. Men who made people disappear from businesses, communities, and sometimes entire states. Suddenly, Blake's desperation made sense. This wasn't about maintaining a luxury lifestyle anymore. This was survival. Then Dante opened another file. There's more. The room became quiet again. He pointed to a series of wire transfers made over the previous year. Every transfer led to the same destination, Victoria Worthington. I leaned forward. What am I looking at? Dante enlarged the screen. Blake has been borrowing money from his mother. That wasn't surprising. Wealthy parents helping struggling children happened every day. Then Dante revealed the amount, nearly $4 million. My pulse accelerated. Victoria wasn't simply helping her son. She was financing him, protecting him, keeping him alive financially. Which meant Zoe was right. Victoria wasn't cleaning up the mess. She was part of it. Then Dante showed us an email recovered from a business archive. It had been sent 6 weeks earlier. The sender was Blake. The recipient was Victoria. The message was short. We need her signature before the end of the quarter, or everything collapses. Nobody in the room spoke. We didn't need to. The motive was now undeniable. The timeline matched perfectly. The debt crisis, the pressure campaign, the treatment facility, the property dispute. Everything began after Blake realized he couldn't survive without Zoe's land. Then another realization hit me. What happens if the sale fails? Dante didn't hesitate. He's ruined. Those 2 words changed everything. Up until that moment, Blake had been the hunter, the aggressor, the one pushing events forward. Now I finally saw the truth. He wasn't operating from strength. He was operating from fear. The Worthington empire wasn't expanding. It was collapsing. They were simply trying to hide the cracks long enough to escape. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, another breakthrough arrived. A woman named Melissa sent additional records through legal counsel. Among them were internal treatment notes from Zoe's facility. Most were routine. Then, Samuel found a paragraph that stopped all of us. According to one staff member, Zoe repeatedly requested contact with her son. Every request was denied. I felt my stomach turn. Why? Samuel kept reading. The justification claimed communication could interfere with treatment goals. It sounded professional, reasonable even. But everyone in the room understood the truth. Leo wasn't being protected from Zoe. Zoe was being separated from Leo. Then came an even worse note. One staff member documented Zoe becoming emotionally distressed after learning Blake had removed several items from their family home. My pulse quickened. What items? Dante looked through another report. Personal documents, financial records, computer equipment. My jaw tightened. Blake wasn't just controlling Zoe. He was cleaning up evidence. Then my phone vibrated. This time the caller was someone I hadn't expected. Leo's kindergarten teacher. I answered immediately. Her voice sounded nervous. Mr. Baxter, I'm sorry to call this late. My stomach tightened. Is Leo okay? There was a pause. Physically, yes. The answer did not reassure me. She lowered her voice. I'm not sure I should be telling you this. Telling me what? Another pause. Then she spoke. Leo drew a picture today. I frowned. A picture? Yes. The teacher sounded increasingly uncomfortable. Normally I wouldn't think much about it, but after everything happening with your daughter, my pulse accelerated. What was in the picture? The teacher took a deep breath. It showed Leo standing between his parents. My chest tightened. And? His mother was behind a fence. The room went silent. The teacher continued. When I asked about it, he said Daddy told him Mommy lives in a special place because she isn't safe anymore. Every person in the room froze. Because children don't invent stories like that. They repeat what they're taught. Blake wasn't waiting for custody. He was already rewriting reality for his son. Then the teacher said something else. Something far worse. Mr. Baxter. Her voice shook slightly. Leo also said his grandmother told him he'll never have to see his mother again once the papers are signed. My heart stopped. The room fell completely silent. Because for the first time, this wasn't just about property. It wasn't just about debt. It wasn't even just about custody. They were planning a future where Zoe disappeared from her own son's life. And suddenly I understood exactly why she had called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. She wasn't trying to save her land. She was trying to save her family. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the picture Leo had drawn. A little boy standing between his parents while his mother sat behind a fence. Children don't understand legal strategy. They don't understand financial coercion. They don't understand manipulation. But they understand separation. They understand fear. and somebody had been feeding fear to my grandson. By sunrise, I was sitting in Samuel's office drinking bad coffee while Dante continued digging through Blake's finances. None of us expected the next breakthrough to come from Zoe herself. At 8:17 that morning, Melissa contacted us through a secure channel. She had managed to speak with Zoe briefly during a supervised recreation period. Zoe couldn't make a direct phone call, but she passed along a message. A very specific message. Check Blake's office. Bottom drawer. Blue folder. That was it. Nothing more. No explanation. No context. Just 6 words. Dante immediately sat up straighter. She wants us to find something. Samuel frowned. The problem is getting access. Fortunately, we already had a path. Several months earlier, Zoe had granted me limited power to access a storage property she owned jointly through a family trust. Blake occasionally used part of the facility to store business records. It wasn't his primary office, but it was connected. More importantly, it was legal. By noon, Dante and I were standing inside a climate-controlled storage suite on the edge of Nashville. We weren't breaking in. We weren't sneaking around. Everything was documented. Everything was lawful. That mattered. Because if this case eventually reached a courtroom, every piece of evidence had to survive scrutiny. The office area looked ordinary at first. Filing cabinets, desks, shelves, nothing unusual. Then Dante found the blue folder. Exactly where Zoe said it would be. Bottom drawer, locked cabinet, hidden behind accounting files. My pulse quickened immediately. If Blake went to the trouble of hiding something, it was important. Inside were property appraisals, debt summaries, lender communications, and development proposals. Then we found the document that explained everything. A proposed land acquisition agreement. I read the first page twice before looking up. This can't be right. Dante took the document and scanned it himself. Oh, it's right. The proposed sale price listed for Zoe's land was just over $10 million. That wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was where the money was going. Less than 30% would remain under Zoe's control. The rest was earmarked for debt settlements, corporate obligations, development guarantees, and lender payoffs connected directly to Blake and several Worthington-controlled entities. I felt sick. They weren't trying to help Zoe manage an asset. They were trying to use her asset to save themselves. Then we found a second document. This one hit even harder. It contained email exchanges between Blake and Victoria. The subject line read, "Post-sale transition plan." As I read the messages, my anger turned cold. Once the sale closed, they planned to petition for long-term financial oversight, citing Zoe's alleged addiction history. They discussed custody, public relations, asset management, future legal strategy. Not once did either of them mention helping Zoe recover, because recovery was never the goal. The goal was control. Then Dante found something even more important. A draft letter prepared by Blake but never sent. Apparently, he had written it during an argument with Zoe several weeks earlier. The letter was raw, emotional, unfiltered. Most likely, he never intended anyone to see it. That made it valuable. Halfway through the second page, I found the sentence that changed everything. If you had just signed the papers, none of this would have happened. The room went completely silent. There it was. Not suspicion, not interpretation, cause and effect. Zoe refused to sign. Then the campaign began. Every major event lined up behind that decision. The facility, the addiction allegations, the custody fight, the isolation, everything. Dante immediately photographed every document and began creating a chain of custody record. We weren't leaving anything to chance. Then he stopped suddenly. "Cornelius." His voice sounded different. "Look at this." He handed me another file. At first, it looked like an ordinary lender agreement. Then I noticed a handwritten note attached to the back. The note came from one of Blake's largest creditors. Payment deadline: 30 days. Failure to comply may result in immediate legal action and asset recovery procedures. The date hit me like a punch. It was the same week Zoe made the emergency phone call, the same week they moved her into the facility, the same week they filed the financial oversight petition. Blake wasn't executing a long-term strategy anymore. He was racing against a clock. Then my phone rang. It was Samuel. The moment I answered, I knew something had happened. "We just received a court response." My pulse accelerated. Good or bad? Both. That wasn't encouraging. Samuel explained that the judge had agreed to review the original toxicology records and authorized an independent medical examination. That was good news, very good news. But there was a condition. The examination would not happen for another 6 days. 6 days. In legal terms, that was fast. In our situation, it felt dangerous. Then Samuel lowered his voice. There's another problem. I closed my eyes. There was always another problem. What? Blake filed an emergency motion requesting temporary sole custody of Leo before the examination takes place. My stomach tightened. On what basis? Samuel's answer made my blood boil. He's arguing that Zoe's condition creates an immediate risk to the child. Exactly the lie they had been building from the beginning. Every false medical record, every rumor, every fabricated concern. It was all leading here. Then Samuel said something unexpected. Cornelius, the judge scheduled the hearing for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, not next week. Not in 6 days. Tomorrow. Suddenly, everything became clear. Blake knew the independent examination could destroy his story. He knew the original lab reports existed. He knew time was running out. This wasn't confidence. It was panic. The moment I ended the call, another message arrived from Melissa. It contained only one sentence from Zoe. 7 words. No explanation. No context. Just 7 words. Tell Dad to check Leo's backpack. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I looked at Dante. Why would she say that? Dante's expression hardened immediately. Because she knows something is hidden there. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I had a feeling Zoe wasn't just defending herself anymore. I think she had found the mistake that could destroy the entire Worthington family. Getting near Leo's backpack should have been simple. He was 5 years old. His backpack wasn't locked in a vault or protected by armed guards. But the Worthingtons had turned ordinary things into battlefields. A school pickup list had become a weapon. A custody motion had become leverage. A child's drawing had become evidence. Now, a small blue backpack with cartoon rockets on it might hold the mistake Zoe risked everything to point us toward. Samuel warned me not to go to the school myself. They want you emotional, he said. They want another scene. One more video of you angry in public, and they use it in court tomorrow. He was right. I hated that he was right. So we used the law instead of force. By early afternoon, Samuel filed an emergency preservation request, asking the court to prevent removal or destruction of any personal items belonging to Leo that might contain communications from Zoe. It sounded dramatic. It sounded unusual. But after the original lab report surfaced, the judge was finally paying attention. 2 hours later, the court ordered both parties to preserve all relevant materials and allowed a neutral child welfare officer to retrieve Leo's school bag for inspection. Everything was documented. Everything was witnessed. No shortcuts, no mistakes. By 4 o'clock, we were in a small conference room at the courthouse. Present were Samuel, Dante, a child welfare officer named Mrs. Parker, Blake's attorney, and me. Blake refused to attend personally. That told me plenty. Mrs. Parker placed the backpack on the table gently, as if it might break. It looked painfully normal. Blue fabric, rocket patches, one zipper half stuck, a plastic dinosaur keychain hanging from the side. For a moment, I almost forgot the money, the lawyers, the lies, and saw only my grandson carrying it into kindergarten. Then Mrs. Parker opened it. Crayons, a lunchbox, a library book, a folded worksheet. Nothing. My heart sank. Maybe Zoe had been wrong. Maybe the message meant something else. Then Dante pointed toward the inside seam. Check the lining. Mrs. Parker frowned, but did as he asked. The bottom lining had been slightly loosened, not enough for a child to notice, enough to hide something flat. She reached inside and removed a folded envelope sealed with clear tape. My name was written on the front in Zoe's handwriting. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Zoe had gotten a message out through her son's backpack. The child welfare officer looked at the attorney, then at Samuel. We need to open this on record. Samuel nodded. A phone began recording. Mrs. Parker carefully cut the tape and unfolded the paper. Inside was a handwritten note and a small memory card. The note was short. Dad, if you found this, they still don't know I copied it. Blake keeps everything in the study safe. Victoria knows. Don't trust anyone who says this is only about money. Protect Leo first. I read the words 3 times. Protect Leo first. Even locked away, drugged, and isolated, Zoe was thinking about her son, not herself. Her son. The memory card changed everything. Dante immediately arranged forensic imaging, so nobody could claim we altered it. We waited while the technician copied the files. Every minute felt endless. Finally, the first folder opened on a courthouse computer. Photos appeared first. Documents, screenshots, images of signed forms, then videos. My pulse quickened. Zoe had done more than hide a note. She had copied evidence from Blake's study before they took her phone. The first video showed Blake arguing with someone off camera. The audio wasn't perfect, but his voice was clear enough. If she signs, we survive. If she doesn't, we all go down. Victoria's voice answered from somewhere nearby. Then stop asking like a husband and start acting like a Worthington. The room went silent. Even Blake's attorney stopped moving. The second video was worse. It showed Blake standing in his study while Victoria spoke near the fireplace. The doctor will say what he needs to say, she told him. The facility already understands the arrangement. Once Zoe is under observation, we move for temporary control, then custody, then the sale. My hands tightened under the table. There it was, the entire sequence. Medical lie, legal control, custody pressure, land sale, not implied. Spoken, clear, deliberate. Then the third file opened. This one wasn't a video, it was an audio recording. At first we heard only background noise. Then Leo's small voice came through. Is mommy sick forever? My heart clenched. Blake answered, maybe. Leo sniffled. Can I call her? Victoria's voice cut in sharply. No. Your mother needs to learn that actions have consequences. The room went completely still. I watched Mrs. Parker's face change. Whatever neutrality she had been trying to maintain cracked in that moment, because the evidence wasn't only financial anymore. It showed emotional harm to a child. It showed adults using a little boy as a pressure tool against his mother. The custody hearing tomorrow had just changed. Then Dante found the final file. It was a scanned agreement labeled Asset Resolution Plan. The document listed the Nashville property, projected sale price, creditor payments, legal fees, and a final line item described as family reputation stabilization. I looked at Samuel. What does that mean? He didn't answer immediately. Dante zoomed in on the notes section. The meaning became clear. Money from Zoe's land would be used to settle Blake's private debts, repay Victoria's hidden advances, silence 2 creditors, fund continued treatment documentation, and support public messaging describing Zoe as unstable. I felt cold all over. They weren't just planning to take the land. They were planning to use her own inheritance to finance the lie that destroyed her. Then Mrs. Parker stood. Her voice was controlled but firm. I need to notify the court immediately. Blake's attorney objected, but weakly. He knew the evidence was devastating. He knew tomorrow's custody hearing was no longer a formality. As we packed the evidence, Samuel pulled me aside. This gives us a real chance. I looked at him. A chance to get Leo? He nodded. And maybe access to Zoe sooner than 6 days. For the first time, the ground shifted under the Worthingtons. They had controlled the narrative. Now Zoe had spoken through proof. That night, I went home exhausted, but unable to rest. I stood in Leo's empty room at my house, the room he used when he stayed weekends. Toy trucks lined the shelf. A small baseball glove sat on the dresser. I touched it gently and promised myself he would sleep here again. Safe, loved. Away from people who used family like leverage. At 11:43 p.m., Dante called. His voice was tense. Cornelius, Blake knows. My stomach tightened. Knows what? That we found the memory card. I closed my eyes. How? His attorney must have warned him, or someone at the courthouse talked. I looked out the window toward the dark street. What is he doing? Dante paused. He just left the Worthington estate to Sleo. Every nerve in my body went sharp. Where is he going? We don't know yet. Then Dante delivered the line I had feared since the moment Leo's name entered this war. But he turned off his phone. The moment Dante told me Blake had turned off his phone, I knew this wasn't about the custody hearing anymore. This was about Leo. Every parent understands a certain kind of fear. Every grandparent does too. But there is a special kind of terror that comes from knowing a child is somewhere you can't reach, while people you don't trust control every decision around him. Within minutes, our entire strategy changed. The hearing suddenly became secondary. Finding Leo became the priority. Samuel immediately contacted the judge handling the emergency custody matter and filed a notice informing the court that Blake had removed the child while a custody dispute was actively pending. That didn't mean Blake had committed a crime. Not yet. He was still Leo's father. But disappearing with the child hours after damaging evidence surfaced made him look desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Dante began tracking every lead available: credit card activity, vehicle registrations, toll records, security cameras, hotel bookings. Nothing. Blake had planned this. He wasn't acting impulsively. He knew exactly what he was doing. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, we got our first break. One of Blake's creditors contacted Dante. Apparently, Blake had missed another payment that afternoon. The lender wasn't calling to help us. He wanted his money. But angry creditors often become excellent sources of information. According to him, Blake recently mentioned a lake property near the Kentucky border, a place he occasionally used when he wanted privacy. By 2 o'clock, Dante had located the address. It wasn't owned by Blake directly. It belonged to a limited liability company connected to one of Victoria's trusts. Another hidden asset. Another secret. We immediately notified law enforcement and the court. This time, things were different. The memory card had changed everything. The judge who reviewed the evidence that evening issued an emergency welfare order authorizing authorities to verify Leo's safety. It wasn't a custody ruling. It wasn't an arrest warrant. It was simply legal permission to locate the child and confirm his well-being. Realistic, limited, enough. Just before dawn, Dante and I arrived near the property. We stayed back while deputies approached. The lake house sat alone near the water. Lights glowed inside. A truck matching Blake's vehicle was parked beside the garage. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Every second felt like an hour. Then the radio crackled. Deputies had made contact. Leo was safe. I nearly collapsed from relief. Safe. That single word outweighed every legal victory we had won so far. Several minutes later, one of the deputies emerged from the house holding Leo's hand. My grandson looked tired, confused, frightened, but unharmed. The moment he saw me standing near the patrol vehicles, he broke free and ran. "Grandpa!" I dropped to one knee and caught him in my arms. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. He just held on, tightly, like he was afraid I might disappear too. Eventually, he pulled back and looked up at me. "Did Mommy send you?" My throat tightened. "Yes, buddy." His eyes immediately filled with tears. "I want my mom." I closed my eyes briefly. So did I. Behind us, Blake was standing beside a deputy. He wasn't handcuffed. He wasn't being arrested. But for the first time since this nightmare started, he looked defeated. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked exhausted, cornered, human. Then something unexpected happened. Leo pointed directly at him. Daddy lied. Every adult present turned toward the child. Blake froze. Leo continued speaking through tears. "Daddy said Mommy didn't love me anymore." Silence fell over the scene. Even the deputies looked uncomfortable, because nobody coached a 5-year-old to say that. Children repeat what they hear, nothing more, nothing less. Blake lowered his eyes. For the first time, he couldn't argue, couldn't manipulate, couldn't spin the story. His own son had exposed him. The court hearing began 4 hours later. I hadn't slept. Neither had Samuel. Neither had Dante. Yet for the first time, I felt momentum shifting. The judge reviewed the memory card evidence, the facility records, the toxicology reports, and the circumstances surrounding Blake's decision to remove Leo overnight. One piece alone might not have been enough. Together, they painted a devastating picture. Then Mrs. Parker, the child welfare officer, testified about Leo's statements. She remained professional, careful, objective, but her conclusion was clear. The child appeared to be experiencing emotional pressure related to negative messaging about his mother. The courtroom became very quiet. Blake's attorney attempted damage control. He argued that Blake was merely protecting his son during a confusing family crisis. It might have worked 24 hours earlier, not anymore. The evidence had grown too large, the contradictions too obvious. Then the judge delivered the ruling. temporary sole custody was denied. The emergency request was dismissed. Furthermore, the court ordered that Leo have immediate supervised contact with Zoe, pending the outcome of the independent medical evaluation. My chest tightened. It wasn't full victory, but it was the first real win. The first time a court officially rejected the Worthington narrative. Then came the moment nobody expected. Blake stood suddenly. His attorney tried to stop him. Too late. "This is insane," Blake snapped. "You don't understand what's at stake." The judge stared at him. "Then explain it." Blake immediately realized his mistake. But the damage was done. The entire courtroom was watching. Reporters, attorneys, court staff, everyone. The judge repeated herself. "Mr. Worthington, what exactly is at stake?" Blake opened his mouth, closed it, then looked toward Victoria, sitting in the gallery. For the first time since I met her, Victoria looked worried, truly worried, because her son was unraveling, and desperate people tell the truth by accident. Finally, Blake muttered 6 words that changed the room completely. "If the land deal fails, we're finished." Silence. Absolute silence. Every person present understood exactly what he had just admitted. Not concern for Zoe, not concern for Leo, not addiction, not treatment. Money. It was always money. The judge's expression hardened immediately. Blake's attorney buried his face in his hands. Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear. And for the first time since that 3 o'clock phone call, the lie that had protected the Worthington family began collapsing in public. As the hearing ended, Samuel leaned toward me. "The independent examination is in 48 hours. I nodded. "Good." But Samuel wasn't smiling. "Cornelius." My stomach tightened. "What now?" He handed me his phone. A new message had arrived from Melissa inside the facility. Only one sentence appeared on the screen. Zoe had collapsed during the night, and the facility physician was refusing to release her medical records. The message from Melissa hit me harder than Blake's courtroom admission. Zoe collapsing changed everything. Until that moment, the facility had been a legal battle, a paperwork battle, a custody battle. Suddenly, it became a medical emergency. Samuel immediately demanded her records. The facility refused. Their attorney cited privacy laws, treatment protocols, and ongoing care requirements. It sounded professional. It sounded reasonable. It was also exactly what people say when they don't want anyone looking too closely. Within an hour, Samuel filed an emergency motion demanding immediate access to Zoe's condition and treatment history. The judge, who had just denied Blake's custody request, agreed to hear it the same afternoon. That alone told me how much the situation had changed. A week earlier, every court filing seemed to favor the Worthington narrative. Now judges were asking questions. Real questions. The hearing lasted less than 40 minutes. The facility's attorney insisted Zoe was stable and receiving appropriate care. Then, Samuel presented the original toxicology reports. The room became very quiet. The attorney suddenly had far fewer answers. The judge ordered immediate disclosure of Zoe's medical records and authorized an independent physician to examine her within 24 hours. It wasn't a complete victory, but it cracked open a door the Worthingtons had worked desperately to keep shut. That evening, Dante finally received the records. We gathered in Samuel's conference room again. The moment the first pages appeared on the screen, everyone knew something was wrong. The medication logs didn't match the diagnosis. Zoe had supposedly been admitted for addiction concerns, yet much of her treatment involved heavy sedatives and anti-anxiety medications. More troubling was the dosage history. Several medications had increased dramatically, despite staff notes describing improvement. Judge Moss, who reviewed the records remotely, immediately spotted the problem. "If these records are accurate," he said carefully, "they were treating her as though she was deteriorating, while documenting that she was improving." The contradiction sat there like a loaded weapon. Then came the physician notes. Multiple entries described Zoe requesting legal counsel, requesting contact with family, requesting access to her financial documents. Almost every request was followed by language suggesting emotional instability, not because she was unstable, because she disagreed with what was happening. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Then Melissa called again. This time she wasn't whispering. She sounded angry. "They're panicking." My pulse quickened. "Who?" "Administration." She explained that facility executives spent the entire day meeting with attorneys. Staff members were being questioned. Records were being reviewed. Supervisors were suddenly concerned about procedures nobody cared about the week before. The pressure was reaching them. Then she revealed the real reason Zoe collapsed. My stomach tightened as she spoke. Zoe had not suffered a medical emergency. She had fainted after refusing additional medication. The incident report itself admitted her vital signs stabilized quickly, yet administrators were using the event to justify delaying outside access. In other words, they were weaponizing the collapse instead of investigating it. Dante looked furious. They're buying time. Exactly. Every day they delayed increased the chance of protecting themselves. Then came the breakthrough we desperately needed. The independent physician completed a preliminary review of Zoe's records before the formal examination. His conclusion wasn't dramatic. It was much better than dramatic. It was credible. According to his initial assessment, there was insufficient evidence supporting long-term inpatient treatment for substance dependency. In plain English, the justification for keeping Zoe there was falling apart. The next morning, reporters began asking questions. Not because of us, because court filings had become public. Local media noticed the contradictions. Why was a woman allegedly battling severe addiction testing negative for drugs? Why were family members fighting over a valuable property? Why was a custody dispute connected to financial oversight petitions? The story was becoming impossible to ignore. By noon, cameras were outside the facility. For the first time, the Worthingtons were losing control of the narrative. Then Blake made another mistake. Instead of remaining silent, he agreed to a television interview. I watched it from Samuel's office with Dante sitting beside me. Blake looked exhausted, defensive, unprepared. The reporter asked straightforward questions. Most he avoided. Then came the question that mattered. If this isn't about the Nashville property, why does every major legal filing begin after your wife refused to sell it? Blake froze, only for a second, but long enough. Long enough for every viewer to notice. He stumbled through an answer about family stress and addiction concerns. It sounded weak, artificial, desperate. The interview ended badly. Social media responded even worse. For the first time, people outside the courtroom started doubting him. That afternoon, another creditor filed suit against Blake, then another. The pressure was building from every direction, financially, legally, publicly, and people under pressure eventually turn on each other. That evening, we learned Victoria and Blake had spent nearly an hour arguing inside the Worthington estate. A domestic employee later confirmed shouting could be heard throughout the house. They weren't united anymore. They were blaming each other. The cracks were widening. Then, the independent examination finally happened. Zoe was transported under court supervision to a neutral medical office. No Worthington representatives, no facility administrators, no private consultants, just physicians. Science, evidence, reality. The examination lasted nearly 3 hours. Every minute felt endless. When it ended, the physician refused to discuss details immediately. Professional ethics required a formal report first. So we waited. The longest 6 hours of my life followed. Then Samuel's phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, and slowly lowered the device. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Finally, he looked directly at me. She's coming home. For several seconds, I couldn't process the words. After weeks of lies, paperwork, isolation, and fear, they felt unreal. Then Samuel smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. The physician found no evidence supporting continued involuntary treatment. My eyes filled immediately. Zoe was finally getting out, but Samuel wasn't finished. There's more. My stomach tightened again. He handed me a copy of the physician's preliminary findings. Halfway down the second page, one paragraph was highlighted. I read it once, then again, then a third time. According to the physician, there was substantial reason to investigate whether certain medications had been administered in a manner inconsistent with the stated treatment objectives. I looked up slowly. What does that mean? Dante answered before Samuel could. His voice was cold. It means somebody may have been keeping Zoe sedated on purpose. And suddenly this case was no longer about custody, land, or financial control. It was becoming something much bigger. I expected to feel relief when Zoe was finally released. Instead, I felt anger, pure anger. Because when I saw my daughter walk out of that facility, the first thing I noticed wasn't that she was free. It was how much damage had been done while she was inside. She moved slowly. Her face looked thinner. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. She wasn't broken, but she looked exhausted in a way no 34-year-old woman should ever look. The moment she stepped outside, reporters began shouting questions. Cameras flashed. Microphones appeared from every direction. Zoe ignored all of them. She saw me standing near the curb and immediately burst into tears. Seconds later, she was in my arms. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. After everything that had happened, words felt too small. Finally, she pulled back and looked at me. "You came." My throat tightened. I never stopped. More tears appeared in her eyes. "I knew you wouldn't. We brought her directly to my house, not a hotel, not an attorney's office, home." The first thing she asked for wasn't legal advice or financial documents. It was Leo. Unfortunately, we still didn't have full custody. The judge had ordered supervised contact while the larger proceedings continued. Better than nothing, but far from enough. Still, that evening, Zoe finally saw her son through a court-approved video call. The moment Leo appeared on the screen, he started crying. So did Zoe. So did I. Neither of them cared about lawyers, judges, or property disputes. They only cared that they could finally see each other again. "Mommy?" Leo whispered. Zoe smiled through tears. "Hi, baby." Leo stared at the screen for several seconds. Then he asked the question that shattered everyone's heart. "Are you safe now?" Zoe covered her mouth. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Finally, she nodded. "Yes." Leo immediately smiled. It was the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in weeks. That single moment reminded me why we were fighting. Not for land, not for money. Family. The next morning, Zoe met with Samuel and Dante. This was the first time she could tell her story without interruption. No facility staff, no Worthington attorneys, no manipulated reports, just the truth. For nearly 3 hours, she walked us through everything. Most of it confirmed what we already suspected. Then she began filling in the missing pieces. According to Zoe, Blake's financial problems started nearly 2 years earlier. Bad investments, failed business ventures, risky loans. At first, she tried helping him. She refinanced accounts, reduced expenses, sold assets. Like many spouses, she assumed honesty would solve the problem. The problem was that Blake wasn't being honest. Every time he claimed the debt was under control, it was actually growing worse. Then came the Nashville property. When developers offered more than $10 million, Blake saw salvation. Zoe saw something different. Security. It wasn't just land. It was part of the inheritance her late grandmother left behind, property that had been in the family for decades. She agreed to consider development opportunities, but refused to sell under pressure. That's when everything changed. Blake became obsessed. Every conversation returned to the property. Every disagreement became an argument. Every family gathering somehow turned into another discussion about signing papers. Then Victoria entered the picture. According to Zoe, her mother-in-law stopped behaving like a concerned relative and started behaving like a strategist. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Phone calls increased, lawyers appeared, financial consultants appeared. People Zoe barely knew suddenly became interested in her personal decisions. Then Zoe revealed the moment she realized she was in danger. One night she accidentally overheard Blake and Victoria arguing inside the study. Blake wanted more time. Victoria didn't. "She'll never sign willingly," Victoria told him. "Then we create circumstances where she doesn't have a choice." The sentence haunted Zoe for weeks. At first, she thought Victoria was referring to legal pressure, negotiation, maybe even divorce. She never imagined what came next. Then came the revelation that changed the entire case. 2 weeks before her emergency phone call, Zoe discovered documents inside Blake's study showing several large debts she had never seen before. Not hundreds of thousands, millions. Debt connected to lenders who expected payment immediately. Debt that could destroy the Worthington family if exposed publicly. When she confronted Blake, he finally admitted the truth. He needed the property sale. Not wanted, needed. Zoe refused again. 3 days later, the rumors about addiction began. The timeline matched perfectly. Cause, effect, motive, real life, real people, real greed. Then Zoe told us about the facility. Contrary to what the public believed, nobody dragged her there physically. The truth was more believable, more frightening. She was manipulated. Family intervention, emotional pressure, threats involving Leo, false concern, professional authority. By the time she realized what was happening, she was surrounded by people insisting she needed help. Once inside, every objection became proof she was unstable. Every request became evidence she wasn't cooperating. Every attempt to contact family became a treatment issue. It was a trap designed to look legitimate from the outside. Then Zoe lowered her voice. "There's something I never told anyone." The room immediately became quiet. Samuel stopped writing. Dante looked up. Even I felt my stomach tighten, because Zoe wasn't the type to hold information back. If she had kept something secret this long, it mattered. She reached into her purse and removed a folded piece of paper. It was old, worn, creased from being hidden. "I found this in Victoria's study 3 days before they took my phone." Samuel carefully unfolded it. At first it looked like ordinary notes. Then we read the contents. The paper listed names, dates, asset values, property descriptions, family relationships. My pulse accelerated immediately. "What is this?" Zoe looked directly at us. "I think it's happened before." Silence filled the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Zoe pointed toward one of the names written on the page. "That family lost control of their estate 4 years ago." She pointed at another. "That woman was placed under financial supervision." Then another, and another. My blood ran cold. Because suddenly, Victoria Worthington didn't look like a mother trying to save her son. She looked like someone who had been doing this for years. Then Zoe revealed the sentence that changed everything. "Dad, I don't think we're the first family they've targeted." For a long moment, nobody in the room spoke. We all stared at the paper Zoe had taken from Victoria's study. At first glance, it looked harmless. Just names, dates, properties, asset values. But the longer we studied it, the more disturbing it became. This wasn't a family financial planner. It wasn't an estate management document. It was a list of opportunities. Every person on it shared similar characteristics: elderly widows, recently divorced individuals, families involved in inheritance disputes, people under emotional stress, people controlling valuable assets. My stomach tightened as Dante began researching the names. Within an hour, a pattern emerged. One family lost a ranch after a guardianship dispute. Another sold property during a controversial financial oversight proceeding. A third became involved in litigation that strangely benefited investors connected to development groups. None of it proved a crime, but together, it painted a picture nobody could ignore. Victoria Worthington wasn't simply protecting her son from bankruptcy. She had experience, far too much experience. Then Dante found the first person willing to talk. Her name was Eleanor Briggs, 72 years old, widow, former owner of over 200 acres outside Bowling Green. 4 years earlier, her nephew petitioned for temporary financial supervision after alleging cognitive decline. Within 8 months, most of her land had been sold. When Dante showed her Victoria's name, she immediately recognized it. "I met her twice," Eleanor said during a recorded interview. "She introduced me to people who claimed they wanted to help." My pulse quickened. "Did they?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Depends who you ask. By the end of the call, we had something more valuable than documents. We had a witness." Then another appeared, then another. Over the next week, former families began contacting Samuel's office. Some had heard about Zoe's case through local news coverage. Others were contacted directly by Dante. Their stories weren't identical, but the similarities were impossible to ignore. Financial pressure, family conflict, professional evaluations, property transfers. Somehow, Victoria's name kept appearing around the edges, never directly responsible, never officially involved, always close enough to benefit. Meanwhile, the public narrative was collapsing. Reporters who initially portrayed Zoe as a troubled addict were now asking different questions. Why were original toxicology reports hidden? Why was a woman with no evidence of substance abuse placed into treatment? Why were financial disputes connected to medical claims? Every article made Blake and Victoria look worse. Then the independent physician's full report became public. It was devastating. Not sensational, not emotional, scientific, professional, credible. The report concluded there was no evidence supporting the addiction allegations used to justify Zoe's confinement. Several recommendations made during her treatment lacked adequate medical support. Most importantly, the physician questioned whether certain medications had contributed to her impaired condition during critical legal proceedings. The moment reporters saw that language, the story exploded. By the following evening, television crews were camped outside the Worthington estate. Blake refused interviews. Victoria disappeared completely. The family that once controlled every narrative now couldn't control a single headline. Then came the first major collapse. One of Blake's largest creditors filed suit demanding immediate repayment and alleging financial misrepresentation. Another followed 24 hours later, then another. Within days, the illusion of wealth that protected the Worthington family for years began falling apart publicly. People discovered what Dante had uncovered weeks earlier. The empire wasn't rich, it was leveraged, debt disguised as success. Then Zoe made a decision that changed everything. She agreed to tell her story publicly, not through social media, not through leaks, through a formal press conference organized by Samuel's office. At first, I worried it was too soon. Zoe had been through hell. But she looked at me and smiled. They've been speaking for me for weeks. She paused. Now it's my turn. The press conference took place inside a community center packed with reporters, attorneys, and local residents. Every seat was filled. Additional cameras lined the walls. The atmosphere felt electric. People weren't there for gossip anymore. They wanted answers. Zoe walked to the podium without notes, without scripts, without fear. Then she told the truth. She described the pressure to sell the land, the financial desperation, the intervention, the facility, the isolation, the attempts to separate her from Leo. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't perform. She simply told the truth. Sometimes truth is stronger than outrage. Then she held up the original toxicology report. The room became silent. This document existed before I entered treatment, she said. People saw it. People ignored it. Cameras flashed everywhere. Reporters leaned forward. Nobody looked away. Then came the moment that destroyed Blake. One reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. Mrs. Worthington, why do you believe this happened? Zoe didn't hesitate. Because I owned something they needed. The simplicity of the answer made it devastating. No complicated conspiracy. No dramatic theory. Money. Property. Debt. Human greed. Everyone understood it instantly. Then something happened nobody expected. A woman stood from the audience, then another, then a third. Former victims. Families Dante had contacted. They weren't scheduled speakers. They weren't part of the event. But one after another, they stood and publicly shared their experiences. Different stories. Same pattern. Same names. Same outcomes. The room transformed from a press conference into something much bigger. It became a reckoning. By that evening, national media picked up the story. Legal analysts discussed the physician report. Financial experts reviewed Blake's debt. Former clients came forward. Investigators began making inquiries. The pressure became impossible to contain. Then, just as everything seemed to be collapsing around them, Victoria finally made her move. The next morning, Samuel received notice of a new lawsuit. Victoria wasn't suing Zoe. She wasn't suing me. She was suing everyone. Defamation, interference with business relationships, emotional distress. It was a legal nuclear weapon designed to frighten witnesses into silence. For several hours, the strategy worked. Some former victims became nervous. Some reporters hesitated. Some potential witnesses stopped returning calls. Then Samuel started laughing. "What's funny?" I asked. He handed me the complaint. Halfway through the filing, I saw it. Victoria had made a mistake, a huge one. In an attempt to defend herself, she attached financial records and correspondence that had never been publicly disclosed before. Documents she believed would help her case. Documents that accidentally confirmed connections she had spent years hiding. Samuel looked at me and smiled. She just handed us discovery evidence before the lawsuit even started. My pulse quickened. How bad is it? Samuel's smile widened. Bad enough that federal investigators are asking for copies. The room went completely silent, because for the first time since that 3 o'clock phone call, this wasn't just a family war anymore. The government was officially paying attention. And people like Victoria Worthington rarely survive that kind of attention. The moment federal investigators requested Victoria Worthington's records, the entire balance of power shifted. For weeks, Blake and Victoria had controlled the battlefield. They controlled the narrative. They controlled the lawyers. They controlled the institutions. Now they were losing control of something far more important: time. Every day brought new witnesses. Every day brought new documents. Every day brought new questions they couldn't answer. And when people spend years building power through secrecy, questions become dangerous. 2 days after Victoria filed her disastrous lawsuit, federal agents issued preservation notices to multiple parties connected to the case: banks, development companies, consulting firms, property managers. Nobody was being charged yet. Nobody was being arrested, but everyone understood what it meant. The government was no longer watching from a distance. It had entered the room. The news spread quickly. Several business partners immediately distanced themselves from the Worthington family. Charity organizations removed Victoria from leadership positions pending review. Invitations disappeared. Phone calls stopped. People who once competed for her attention suddenly forgot her number. Wealth attracts loyalty. Trouble reveals the truth. Then came the deposition. Victoria had spent years intimidating other people inside conference rooms. Now she sat across from attorneys answering questions under oath. The session lasted nearly 7 hours. By the end, she looked exhausted. The transcript became devastating reading. Every answer created 3 new questions. Every denial contradicted a document. Every explanation seemed weaker than the last. Then, Samuel introduced the email chain she accidentally disclosed in her lawsuit. The room went silent. Victoria tried explaining the communications. She tried minimizing them. She tried redirecting blame toward Blake. Nothing worked. The documents existed. Her words existed. The timeline existed. Facts are stubborn things. Meanwhile, Blake's world was collapsing even faster. 3 creditors obtained emergency court orders, freezing portions of his financial activity. One lender initiated foreclosure proceedings against a commercial property connected to his business. Another demanded immediate repayment of personal guarantees. The man who once acted like a future millionaire suddenly spent every day trying to avoid insolvency. Then came the biggest public humiliation yet. A local television station obtained portions of the custody hearing transcript. Specifically, the part where Blake accidentally admitted the land deal was the real issue. The clip spread everywhere. People who knew nothing about toxicology reports or legal filings understood exactly what they were hearing. A husband claiming concern for his wife had accidentally confessed his financial motive in open court. Public sympathy evaporated overnight. Then the independent physician agreed to testify. That development terrified the defense. Unlike family members, journalists, or former associates, the physician had no personal agenda, no financial interest, no emotional involvement, just evidence. During a preliminary hearing, he explained his findings calmly and professionally. Zoe did not meet the criteria typically associated with the addiction narrative used to justify her confinement. The medications administered during her stay required further review. Several treatment decisions raised legitimate concerns. He never used dramatic language. He didn't need to. Credibility was doing the work for him. Then the final witness appeared, Melissa. For weeks, she had risked her career helping Zoe. Now she agreed to testify publicly. The courtroom was packed the day she took the stand. Reporters filled every available seat. Attorneys lined the walls. Community members stood in hallways, watching through open doors. Melissa described what she saw inside the facility: the missing requests for legal counsel, the inconsistent records, the pressure from administrators, the growing concern among staff members. Then she delivered the sentence that destroyed the defense. No one ever showed me evidence that Zoe Worthington was addicted to illegal drugs. Absolute silence followed. The kind of silence that only appears when everyone understands the significance of what was just said. Victoria looked down. Blake stared at the table. Their attorneys stopped taking notes, because there was nothing left to explain. Then, federal investigators made their move. Search warrants were executed at multiple locations connected to the development project. Financial records were seized. Electronic devices were collected. Internal communications were reviewed. The investigation that began with a frightened woman calling her father at 3 o'clock in the morning had grown into something far larger. Several days later, Samuel called me before sunrise. I could hear excitement in his voice. "Turn on the news." I reached for the remote immediately. Every major local station carried the same story. Federal authorities had announced a formal investigation into financial misconduct, conspiracy, and potential abuse of legal processes connected to multiple property transactions. No names were officially released. They didn't need to be. Everyone knew who the story was about. Then came the moment I had imagined 100 times. Victoria Worthington finally appeared in public. Not at a charity gala, not at a fundraiser, not at a press conference she controlled. She appeared walking into a courthouse, surrounded by reporters demanding answers. The same woman who spent years shaping public opinion now couldn't escape it. Cameras followed her every step. Questions came from every direction. Did you target vulnerable families? Did you profit from guardianship disputes? Did you help isolate Zoe Worthington? Victoria said nothing. She kept walking, but silence speaks too, especially when someone has spent years pretending to have all the answers. That afternoon, the judge issued the ruling everyone had been waiting for. The financial oversight petition was permanently dismissed. Every restriction connected to Zoe's decision-making authority was removed. The court formally recognized her right to manage her property, finances, and affairs without interference. Zoe cried when she heard the decision. So did I. Not because we won money, because we won freedom. Then came the custody ruling. The judge reviewed months of evidence, the recordings, the manipulation, the false narratives presented to Leo, the attempts to separate mother and son. When the ruling was announced, the courtroom became completely still. Primary custody was awarded to Zoe. Blake received only limited supervised visitation, pending further review. Leo wasn't a bargaining chip anymore. He wasn't leverage anymore. He was finally protected. Outside the courthouse, Zoe knelt and hugged her son while dozens of cameras captured the moment. It wasn't staged. It wasn't planned. It was real. A mother who almost lost everything holding the child she refused to abandon. The image appeared on front pages across the state the next morning. But the biggest shock came hours later. Just when it seemed the story couldn't get any larger, Dante called. His voice sounded different than usual, more serious, more focused. "Cornelius," he said. "Federal investigators found something." My stomach tightened. "What?" There was a brief pause. Then he answered, "The Nashville property was never their final goal." I felt a chill run through me. "What are you talking about?" Dante took a breath. "The documents they seized show they expected to use Zoe's land to solve an immediate crisis. After that, they planned to move on to another family." Silence filled the line. Then he added the sentence that changed everything one last time. "Cornelius, your family wasn't the target. You were the next victim in a business model." The final collapse of the Worthington Empire did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happened the way most real empires fall, piece by piece, document by document, witness by witness. Every lie required another lie to protect it. Every secret required another secret to hide it. Eventually, the weight became too much. 3 months after Zoe walked out of the treatment facility, federal investigators completed the first phase of their review. The results were devastating. Financial records, internal communications, lender agreements, development contracts, and witness statements all pointed toward the same conclusion. What happened to Zoe was not an isolated family dispute. It was part of a broader pattern of exploiting vulnerable people whose assets could solve someone else's financial problems. The Nashville property had been the immediate objective, but it was never the only objective. It was simply the next one. The public hearings began 6 weeks later. Reporters packed the courthouse every day. Former victims filled the gallery. Families who had spent years believing nobody would ever listen finally had a chance to be heard. The same courthouse that once accepted the narrative that Zoe was an unstable addict was now hearing testimony about manipulation, financial coercion, abuse of legal processes, and systematic deception. The irony was impossible to miss. Victoria Worthington arrived every morning dressed exactly as she always had. Expensive suits, perfect posture, controlled expression. She looked like a woman determined to convince the world she remained untouchable. But appearances no longer mattered. Evidence had replaced reputation. During testimony, witness after witness described the same pattern: pressure, isolation, professional authority, financial benefit, different names, different circumstances. the same outcome. Then Melissa testified again. Then the independent physician. Then Eleanor Briggs. Then several former business associates who had finally decided protecting themselves was no longer worth protecting Victoria. The walls closed in from every direction. Blake's testimony came near the end. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically, spiritually, like a man carrying the weight of every bad decision he had ever made. For the first time since this nightmare began, he stopped blaming everyone else. He admitted the debt. He admitted the pressure. He admitted trying to force Zoe into the sale. He admitted allowing fear to become more important than family. The courtroom remained silent as he spoke. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Because his confession wasn't dramatic. It was believable. "I told myself I was saving my family," he said quietly. "The truth is, I was saving myself." Even Zoe looked away when he said it. Not because she forgave him, because she finally understood him. Then came Victoria's testimony. For years she had controlled conversations, controlled meetings, controlled outcomes. Under oath, she couldn't control facts. Every answer created contradictions. Every contradiction led back to a document. Every document led back to another witness. The confidence that once made her intimidating slowly disappeared. Then Samuel presented the email that ultimately destroyed her credibility. The same email chain discussing the sequence of events surrounding Zoe's confinement, the financial oversight strategy, and the property sale. Victoria tried explaining it, tried redefining it, tried minimizing it. Nothing worked. The words belonged to her, the timeline belonged to her, the decisions belonged to her. For the first time, she looked toward the gallery where dozens of reporters sat taking notes and seemed to realize there was no way out. Then came the moment everyone would remember. The lead investigator was asked a simple question. "Based on your investigation, what was the primary motive behind the actions taken against Zoe Worthington?" The answer was only one sentence. "Financial control of assets valued at over $10 million. That sentence ended the debate. Not addiction, not concern, not treatment, money. The same motive that started everything. Within weeks, formal charges followed against multiple participants connected to the scheme. Civil judgments followed. Business partnerships dissolved. Contracts disappeared. Investigations expanded. The Worthington name, once treated like a symbol of influence, became associated with public disgrace. Victoria lost her foundation positions, lost her board memberships, lost her social standing. Eventually, she lost something even more important, the ability to convince people she was the victim. Blake declared bankruptcy before the year ended. Several assets were liquidated. Properties were sold. Creditors took what remained. The man who nearly destroyed his own family trying to save his fortune ended up losing both. The custody matter reached its final conclusion shortly afterward. After reviewing months of evidence, testimony, recordings, and expert findings, the court awarded Zoe primary custody of Leo. Blake received limited visitation under structured conditions. The ruling wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. For the first time in a long time, Leo could simply be a child again. No manipulation, no pressure, no one teaching him to fear his mother. The day the order became final, Zoe cried harder than she had when she left the facility. Not because she won, because she no longer had to fight. Then something happened I never expected. Several community organizations publicly honored Zoe for exposing misconduct that may have affected other families. She hated public attention, always had. But when she stood on that stage and spoke about truth, accountability, and protecting vulnerable people, the room rose to its feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. I sat in the audience with Leo beside me and realized how different the ending looked from where we started. A few months earlier, people believed she was an addict. Now they knew she was the person who helped expose the lie. After the ceremony, a reporter approached me. "Mr. Baxter, what kept you going?" I looked across the room. Zoe was kneeling beside Leo, helping him straighten a crooked tie. The same child they tried to use as leverage. The same daughter they tried to silence. Safe. Together. Free. "Because she called me," I answered. The reporter looked confused. I smiled. "At 3 o'clock in the morning, my daughter called and asked me to come get her." I paused. A father doesn't ignore that call. The following spring, we gathered on the Nashville property. The land was still there, untouched, Exactly as Zoe wanted. Wild grass moved gently in the wind. Leo ran through the open field, chasing a kite. For the first time in nearly a year, nobody was talking about lawsuits, debt, investigations, or hearings. We were simply a family spending time together. Zoe walked beside me as we watched Leo run across the hill. "You know," she said quietly, "they thought this was about the land." I smiled. "It never was." She nodded. "Because we both understood the truth. The land mattered, the money mattered, but neither was the reason we fought. We fought because family mattered more." A few minutes later, Leo came running toward us, holding the kite string above his head. "Look, Grandpa," I laughed as the kite climbed higher into the blue sky. Higher and higher, until it seemed almost impossible to see. Then Zoe slipped her arm through mine. "Dad? Yeah?" She looked toward Leo, then toward the horizon, then back at me. "Was it worth it?" I watched my grandson laughing in the sunlight. I watched my daughter standing free beside me. I thought about the phone call that started everything. The gate, the lies, the fear, the courtroom, the fight. Every single step. Then I smiled. Every second. The wind carried the kite higher. The sun settled lower across the field. And for the first time since that terrible night, there was no crisis waiting around the corner. No secret left unexplained. No lie left standing. The people who chose greed faced the consequences. The people who chose truth got their lives back. Justice had finally been served, and the ending was worth the journey.